chapter, there's this great quote by John Bailey. I absolutely love it. John Bailey, he's a Scottish theologian. He's written a number of Christian books, and I think this quote perfectly outlines exactly where God's taking us this morning. The quote reads like this: "Humility is the adverse side of confidence in God, whereas pride is the adverse side of confidence in self." Before we get into today, I'm going to pray. Dear Lord, I just pray that in this moment, you can take away all other distractions that we may be having at the moment. That whatever this past week has brought, or whatever the week ahead is to bring, that for this moment, you can cast it aside and quiet our mind and heart so we can hear your voice in all of this. In your mighty name, amen. So, for anyone who's been following along with the book, you may have already realized that each chapter aligns with one of the Psalms. Today, the Psalm connected to humility is Psalm 131. So Psalm 131, a song for pilgrims ascending to Jerusalem, a psalm of David. Lord, my heart is not proud, my eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with matters too great or too awesome for me to grasp. Instead, I've calmed and quieted myself. Like a weaned child who no longer cries for his mother's milk, yes, like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, for your hope is in the Lord, now and always. I think that's a great verse. And also, if you've been following along, you may know that Eugene Pearson, the author of the book, had also had heavy involvement with writing the Message translation of the Bible. So, for a moment, let's look at what Psalm 131 says in the Message translation. God, I'm not trying to rule the roost. I don't want to be king of the mountain. I haven't meddled where I've no business or fantasized of grandiose plans. I've kept my feet on the ground. I've cultivated a quiet heart. Like a baby content in its mother's arms, my soul is a baby content. Wait, Israel, for God. Wait with hope, hope now, hope always. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm a very visual person. And for me, I love the use of imagery, especially in the Bible. I love when it perfectly describes what it's trying to convey, not with just simple words, but also with pictures. I absolutely love it. Now, of course, it's hard to write a talk on humility without asking yourself, how humble am I really? Or what does biblical humility look like in real life? And for me, those took a while to answer. And not because they're just tough questions, but also for anyone who knows me, I get distracted very easily. So I started off questioning, okay, well, am I really humble? And do I know what biblical humility looks like in real life? And then I got a notification on my phone. And then that started the journey down the yellow brick road of distractions. And eventually I end up at the same place I started. And that's where I remembered the one place where I can confidently say I saw true humility. So almost 3 years ago now, me and a small group of 11 others went on a trip over to Nepal. This was for a program we were doing called Navigate Adventure. We'd gone on many trips throughout the year, all within Australia, and this was the big lead up, the international trip. We spent 2 weeks over there to be able to experience what it was like for Christians living over in Nepal. We visited a number of places. We visited cities, rural towns, places up in the mountains in the middle of nowhere. but the most memorable for me was this small little rural town called Garambisi. We spent a few days of the trip down there, and one of those days we were lucky enough to be able to go along to a church there. And that's where I believe I saw true humility. Now, what I saw there was complete and utter confidence in God. They didn't have the luxuries that we have. They only had what they needed. And they had trust in God that He'll continue to fill those needs. And it's from this confidence and trust in God that humility overflows. Now, that was a perfect image of humility in real life for me. In the book, it also uses another great example of humility. It uses the example of a rosebush and a gardener. So this is the first part of the chapter here. Christian faith needs continuous maintenance. It requires attending to. If you leave a thing alone and you leave it to torrents of change. If you leave a white post alone, it'll soon be a black post. Every spring in my neighborhood, a number of people prune their bushes and trees. It's an annual practice amongst people who care about growing things. It is also one of those acts, an outsider, one who has no understanding how growth works, always misunderstands. For it always looks like an act of mutilation. It appears that you're ruining the plant, where in fact you're helping it. We have a rose bush that hasn't been pruned for several years. When it was first bloomed, the roses were full and vigorous. Last summer, the plant was longer than ever. The vines ranged up to the roof of the trellis I had made. I anticipated more roses than ever, but I was disappointed. The blossoms were small and scrawny. The branches had gone too far from the roots. The plants couldn't grow a healthy blossom. It needed a good pruning. Now, for me, I love that example. I grew up in a house where my mum was always in the garden looking after her plants. So for that, I absolutely loved. See, Psalm 131, it's about maintenance. It isn't just saying you need to be humble. It's also saying you need constant maintenance to be able to continue being humble. A rosebush, when its branches grow too far from the roots, it's too far away from the nutrients, so it can't produce a healthy blossom. Same is true when we stop putting our confidence in God. We put our confidence in ourselves, and like an outsider who doesn't understand, we don't prune because we don't understand. We let our arrogance grow. Like a rose bush, we need to trim off what may look good so we can thrive into the next season. We need to prune off our arrogance and our wild ambitions. Now that leads me to my first point. If anyone likes to take notes, I'd recommend writing this down. I've got 3 questions I'll ask throughout this. My first question is, are you abandoning your position for something more? Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, are you letting your arrogance be your driving force? Instead of putting your confidence in God, are you putting your confidence in yourself? If we go back to Psalm 131, let's just focus on verse 1 for a second. Verse 1 says, "Lord, my heart is not proud, my eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with matters too great or too awesome for me to grasp." That was the NLT translation. The challenge here is to put your confidence in God and what He has given you, and not to reach for something beyond, for more that we can handle. My second question for you all today is, are you trying to be God? Now, obviously, I'm not asking, are you trying to be God in a literal sense? What I mean is, Are you putting your arrogance and your ambitions on a higher pedestal than God? Instead of completely putting your confidence in God, are you putting your confidence in yourself and your own aspirations? Verse 2 paints a beautiful picture of what confidence in God should really look like. It reads, Instead, I have calmed and quieted myself, like a weaned child who no longer cries for its mother's milk. Yes, like a weaned child, my soul within me. Now that paints a perfect picture of what confidence in God should look like a child, not a baby who's totally reliant on his mother, but a child, not because they're helpless and they need their mother, but because of the child's willingness to be led and taught. Now, as I bring to my final question, I'll invite worship back up. Now, so the first two questions I had were, are you abandoning your position for something more, or are you trying to be God? Now, if you have time throughout the week, or if you can make time, I'd highly recommend spending some time just be able to sit with these questions, and some you may know the answer to, some you may not. I'd highly recommend taking it to God. So our first question was, are you abandoning your position for something more? Second, are you trying to be God? And lastly, am I putting my confidence in God or myself? Now, before we move back into a space of worship, there's just one last part I want to read out of the book. This is the very last part of the chapter. It's the very last paragraph, and I absolutely love it. It reads, and that is what Psalms 131 nurtures, a quality of calm confidence and quiet strength that knows the difference between unruly arrogance and faithful aspiration, knows how to discern between infidel dependency and childlike trust, and chooses to aspire to trust and to sing. I've kept my feet on the ground. I've cultivated a quiet heart. Like a baby content for its mother's arms, my soul is a baby content.